June 6, 1944. The dawn of the greatest invasion in human history. The world was about to change forever. As the sun rose over northern France, thousands of Allied soldiers stared toward the beaches of Normandy. The wind whipped across the channel, the sea was rough, the air was filled with the thunder of engines. Hundreds of ships stretched as far as the eye could see, an armada unlike anything the world had ever witnessed. While this massive force advanced toward occupied Europe, deep inside Germany, one man, the man who had plunged the continent into war, was sound asleep. Adolf Hitler, the Führer of the Third Reich, the man who demanded control of everything, who demanded to know every movement, every order, every attack, didn't even know that the most important day of the war had begun. Inside his headquarters, the Wolf's Lair, phones were ringing, officers were rushing through hallways, and messages were piling up. Reports were coming in from France. Allied paratroopers had landed behind German lines. Coastal defenses were under attack. Beaches were burning. But no one dared to open Hitler's bedroom door. Everyone in that building knew one rule: never wake the Führer. Not unless you wanted to face his wrath. His temper was explosive, unpredictable, and terrifying. Officers had been screamed at, demoted, even fired on the spot for lesser reasons. Some never returned after angering him, so they waited. They stood in the hall, whispering, pacing, unsure what to do as the biggest invasion in history unfolded without their leader. Every passing minute meant disaster for Germany's defense, but no one had the courage to disturb his sleep. Meanwhile, across the Channel, the Allies were fighting for their lives. Waves of landing craft crashed into the beaches of Normandy. Men jumped into the freezing surf under relentless gunfire. Many never made it to shore. Machine guns tore through the ranks, artillery exploded all around, and the sand turned red. Yet somehow they kept coming, wave after wave, thousands of them. Above, the sky was filled with Allied planes. Bombers pounded German bunkers, fighters strafed the coastline, paratroopers drifted down through smoke and chaos, landing behind enemy lines to destroy bridges, cut communications, and sow confusion. The plan was working, barely. Every second counted. And still, Hitler slept. Hitler's odd routine had always baffled his staff. He preferred to stay awake until 4 or 5 in the morning, talking endlessly with his inner circle, Goebbels, Bormann, and others. They would sit for hours as he rambled about war strategy, architecture, or even his love for opera and art. Then he would sleep through the morning and into the early afternoon. That routine on this day became a fatal flaw. At 7 a.m., Hitler's generals begged to wake him. They had confirmation. This wasn't a raid or a distraction. It was the full invasion. But his aides refused. "He is not to be disturbed," they said. By 9 a.m., the situation was desperate. The German forces on the coast were calling for reinforcements. Panzer divisions stood ready nearby, but they couldn't move without Hitler's direct approval. No one had that authority except him. By the time he finally woke around noon, the Allies had already secured multiple beachheads. The moment to push them back into the sea was gone. When Hitler stumbled into his briefing room, still groggy, his staff swarmed him with reports. They showed him maps, photos, and intercepted transmissions. Thousands of enemy troops were flooding into France. Entire sections of the Atlantic Wall were collapsing. He listened quietly, then finally he spoke. "This is not the real invasion." The room fell silent. His generals stared in disbelief. Hitler insisted that the landings at Normandy were merely a diversion, a clever ruse designed to distract him from the true attack that would come at the Pas-de-Calais, further north. He had believed this for months. The Allies had fed him false intelligence through one of the greatest deception operations ever devised, Operation Fortitude. They had built a fake army in southern England, complete with inflatable tanks, dummy planes, and fake radio traffic. They even put General George S. Patton in command of this phantom force. To Hitler, it was perfect proof. He was utterly convinced that Patton would lead the real invasion across the shortest point between Britain and France, Calais. Normandy, he thought, was just a distraction. His generals pleaded with him. The evidence was overwhelming. This was the main invasion. The Allies weren't holding anything back. But Hitler's mind was made up. He refused to move the panzers. "Let them come," he said. "We will crush them at Calais." So the hours slipped away. On the beaches, German troops fought desperately, waiting for the reinforcements that never came. They radioed for help, for tanks, for air support, anything. But Hitler's orders were to hold position. By the time he finally agreed to release the armored divisions, the Allies had already dug in. They had anti-tank guns ready, artillery positioned, fighter planes circling overhead. When the German tanks finally rolled toward Normandy that afternoon, Allied aircraft swooped down and destroyed them one by one. It was too late. That morning's delay had cost Germany everything. Historians still debate whether the war could have turned out differently if those tanks had moved earlier. Some say it might have changed the entire course of D-Day. Others believe the Allies were too strong, too determined. But what's certain is this: Hitler's arrogance and his refusal to listen sealed his fate. His decision wasn't based on strategy, it was based on ego. For years, he had refused to trust his generals. He saw himself as the only true military genius in Germany. His command structure reflected that. Every order, every movement, every decision had to go through him personally. That obsession with control paralyzed his army when it mattered most. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel had seen it coming. Months earlier, he inspected the beaches of Normandy and warned, "If they attack, it will be here." He begged Hitler for more defenses, more troops, and more tanks. Hitler ignored him. Rommel was overruled. Instead, more resources went north, to Calais. On D-Day itself, Rommel wasn't even in France. He was back in Germany, celebrating his wife's birthday. When he heard the news, he raced back, but the damage was done. Throughout the day, Hitler clung to his belief that the real invasion hadn't begun. "Wait," he told his generals, "the main attack will come." Even as the Allies poured more men and vehicles onto the beaches, even as German units were being wiped out, he refused to believe what was right in front of him. By nightfall, more than 150,000 Allied soldiers had landed in France. They had taken terrible losses, but they held the beaches. The Germans had lost their only chance to push them back into the sea. Within days, the Allies began building massive supply lines across the Channel. They unloaded tanks, artillery, ammunition, food, everything they needed to drive deeper into France. Hitler had given them the time they needed to succeed, and still he refused to admit he was wrong. Even weeks later, as the Allies broke through the German lines and began their march toward Paris, he insisted Calais was the real target. His generals were horrified. Some began to realize the truth. They were following a man who had lost touch with reality. In secret, some even began plotting to remove him. They knew the war was lost. So what exactly did Hitler say when he finally understood what was happening? Witnesses remember his words. He looked at the map, sighed, and muttered, "So they've come." Then, almost casually, he added, "This is not the real invasion." Those 6 words summed up his downfall: arrogance, denial, and a refusal to face the truth. By the time he realized the invasion was real, it was far too late. The Allies were unstoppable. The tide of war had turned. Today, military historians study that morning as a lesson in failed leadership, a reminder of how one man's ego, one man's stubbornness can doom an entire nation. On June 6, 1944, while brave men fought and died on the beaches of Normandy, the man who claimed to command Europe slept through the beginning of his own end. One morning, one decision, one sentence, and the fate of a nation was sealed.